What you're playing.
Sorry, were you not able to see?
No, we could see your screen and your files, etc.
Oh, okay. 1 second, I'm going to start off again. I'm going to stop sharing.
It happens.
Yeah, sorry.
Madhura, you share your desktop.
You open that screen first or open the video first. Yeah, that was good. That was good.
Is it working now?
It was. Now you've come out.
Thank you. I hope that worked in some way.
It did.
Thank you. I am now going to just show the report to everyone, what it actually looks like. I know that it would have been nicer to send it across to all of you, but with all the challenges that we have, this is what it looks like. Thank you very much, and compliments to Dr. Nayan Mitra and the entire team which worked on it. Yes, Purnima, and over to you. Thank you.
Great, Madhura. This is a wonderful thing. The first report of AFH about 1 year from the time you started out. So today, everybody, welcome back again. Today, we have close to 1 hour to discuss this topic and capture the input of experts on the subject. Let me begin by sharing the backdrop for our discussion. Last year was a year that everyone would like to put behind us. The pandemic has affected both men and women alike. To study the impact of COVID-19, Aspire for Her and Sustainable Advancements did a detailed study covering nearly 1,000 respondents. The study, titled Impact of COVID-19 on Women at Work 2021, is now available on the websites of both organizations. The study found that COVID-19 affected working women across the board. A majority of the women conceded that the pandemic had affected their professional and personal lives, sometimes positively, but to a large extent in a negative way. The impact was felt more severely by those at middle management levels than those by senior management, and then by those entering the work stream. The impact of the pandemic was most negative on self-employed women. It impacted them by striking at the core of their business, the slowdown of the pipeline of customers, and never getting relief from work at home and in the workplace. Teachers too felt the impact on their professions and their lives. So let's start the discussion. We have a really impressive and diverse panel here today. From Mumbai is Madhura Dasgupta Sinha, founder and CEO Aspire for Her, the community platform for working women. Next is a young entrepreneur, Navya Nanda, co-founder and CMO at Aara Health, a women's health tech startup and founder of Project Naveli. She is dialed in from New York. From Kolkata is Dr. Nayan Mitra, Founder Director, Sustainable Advancements. And from Delhi is Nishtha Satyam, Deputy Country Representative, UN Women, India, Bhutan, Maldives, and Sri Lanka. And here I am Purnima Shenoy, your moderator from Bangalore. I'll request each of the panelists to introduce themselves, their organization, and their perspective on the subject. Madhura, let's start with you.
Thank you, Purnima. I am Madhura Dasgupta-Sana, founder and CEO of Aspire for Her. I spent 25 years of my life in banking. I was working in leadership positions in banks like Standard Chartered, ANZ Trindays, and IDFC. Aspire for Her was born out of a realization that India's gender statistics looked terrible and someone needed to do something about it. What started off as a kernel of an idea on the 8th of September last year has now turned into a bustling community of 30,000 of members, mentors, and supporters. Our vision is to add 1 million women to the workforce in India by 2025. I'm delighted that we use this opportunity to work with sustainable advancements to understand the psyche of the working Indian women through this research report. This research is not just a report for us. It is the cornerstone of our strategy, and I'm sure it will drive many introspections, conversations, and more importantly, action in the world of Indian working women in the post-pandemic world. Thank you.
Thanks, Madhura. I'll request Navya to introduce herself, her entrepreneurial venture, and her perspective on the topic. As we is looking at different generations, so we have a new approach to this too.
Yes, thank you. My name is Navya. I'm 23 years old, so definitely youngest on the panel, but thank you for having me here and letting me represent the younger generation of women entrepreneurs. I'm the co-founder of Aara Health, which is a women's health tech company. We create scientifically backed health and wellness products and education resources for Indian women. And I also co-founded Project Naveli, which is a nonprofit initiative supporting gender equality in India. I think looking at the context of working women in India, we know that the pandemic has disproportionately impacted them, especially younger women entrepreneurs working in India who've had struggles with running and sustaining their businesses. Um, I think this report has highlighted a lot of the reasons why this has taken place, and I'm looking forward to talking about those reasons a bit more.
Wonderful, thank you. We request Dr. Nayan Mitra, co-author of the report, to share her perspectives and speak about sustainable advancements.
Thank you, Purnima. I am Dr. Nayan Mitra, founder director of Sustainable Advancements, which is an internationally acclaimed think tank in the areas of sustainability, CSR, and responsible leadership. The SDGs Global Goals, as they are known, through advocacy, 5 or gender issues across various sectors, and contribute towards it not only through my work as the founding president of the Wiki West Bengal Sustainable Businesses Council and other women-centric forums, but I'm also a board member of some of the eminent NGOs and shelter homes for vulnerable rescued girls and women. I'm the series editor of Responsible Leadership and Sustainable Management by Springer Nature, where the very first book is on diversity and inclusion. It has been an absolute pleasure for me to collaborate and conduct this comprehensive research on women at work with Aspire for Her. This is an action research, and I do hope that it will be the foundation for us to choose to challenge. I do believe it is critical to Aspire for Her to bring about sustainable advancements.
Thank you, Nayan. Nishtha, it would be wonderful to hear your perspective on the topic.
Well, I'm really glad as UN Women, it always supports our agenda. when a community like this comes together to put forward what I think is one of the most urgent conversations of our time. So I'd like to congratulate all of you for launching the report, for filling a gap that is so critical. I'd also like to talk a little more about what is a working woman, because you see, there is not a single woman in this world who does not work. So there is nothing called a woman who doesn't work. All women work. Someone is paid for it. Someone is recognized for it, and a lot of us aren't. We fall within the invisible realms of work. So I think this is the conversation Madhura and I have had on TV before, but I think it'd be very important today to also take this opportunity to relook at what constitutes work, who is a working woman, what do we recognize as work, and do we have an opportunity in front of us to really rebuild, fundamentally rethink, and also reconceive the very idea of why women work, what they work for, and who is a working woman. I think it's time that we have those conversations so that we don't leave out so many women across the globe and so many women in this country who really have fallen through the cracks. We have to visibilize the invisible. So for me, that will remain the agenda for today. But I'm also delighted to be here to hear from all of you. I'm very excited always on panels when there's anybody between the age bracket of 20 to 25, because, I didn't have these conversations when I was Navya's age. I was busy trying to think of what MBA to do and how do I keep my parents happy with a very, very mediocre life choice. But I'm really glad that young women across the globe have taken the opportunity to speak up at a time that matters to them, at a time that matters to the world, and at a time when I think gender equality is an actual possibility. It's no longer that dream that we were talking about 50 years back. Today, we're discussing a possibility. And that should bring in a lot more excitement, but also a lot more urgency in all of us to have this conversation today. So thank you very much for thinking of me.
Super, Nishtha. Very new perspective, and I think good food for questions that are likely to come on. So what we're going to do is we request people to post their questions on the chat box. I'm going to ask two questions of the panelists in relation to the report. And after that, I will start going to the chat box and see what are the questions that we can ask the panelists. If you want to address a specific panelist, please put in the name. So my first question here is, the pandemic affected 42% of small business owners negatively, but it still showed a path for entrepreneurship and, most importantly, self-reliance. How can we convince women that entrepreneurship is a viable career option? I would like to ask young entrepreneur Navya to begin with her response to this, and then we can move on to the others.
Sure. Before speaking about, how we can encourage women into entrepreneurship, I wanted to just quickly set the context for, a woman entrepreneur in India. Most of the women entrepreneurs we have in India are either solopreneurs or nanopreneurs. Solopreneurs, run their businesses independently with zero hired workers, while a nanopreneur tends to employ at least one or two hired workers within their business. And many women-led businesses in India are micro enterprises or self-financed. And these enterprises are in sectors like tourism, education, and beauty, which have been the most affected by the pandemic-led lockdown. I think some of the challenges that women entrepreneurs are currently facing are fighting for resources like devices and bandwidth, especially with, husbands working from home and children being homeschooled. That has taken priority over the women being, able to use these resources to for their businesses. Like I mentioned, many of these industries with women running them, such as beauty businesses and boutiques, were exceptionally badly hit due to the reduced spending and lockdown because of the pandemic. And I think personally, even at my own startup, we have faced some of these issues. So things like cutting costs and, raw materials becoming more expensive. I think that a lot of women are in this boat. And I think when we're talking about how can we encourage more women to become entrepreneurs? I think it starts with, like Nishtha said as well, just the language around what constitutes a working woman. And I think that language begins at home. I think it starts with the conversations that, we have at home, the language we use, the examples we are setting. And it also starts with the men wanting to achieve that as well and encouraging and supporting women into entering the workforce. I think it also starts with, education. What are we teaching in our schools? How are we, encouraging women at a younger age to become more independent and take up entrepreneurship? I think offering young women, especially at a school age, opportunities to really be a part of the economy through, internships and fellowships may encourage them to take up not just an education in the STEM field, but also take a keen interest in wanting to run a business. I think that especially in the entrepreneurial space in India, it's also a very male dominated culture. And I think there's a lack of role models for girls and women in this space, and your success stories of women who have run these businesses. And now we have seen people like Falguni Nair come out with, something as incredible as Nykaa, which has, I think, inspired a lot of women to take on this entrepreneurial journey. But I think it all comes back to the fundamentals, which is the language and the encouragement. And as a society, how we encourage younger women to kind of grow as, they finish their education and are ready to enter the workforce.
Very nice. Thank you. Madhura, your perspective on this? I really like Navya's perspective on this. So Madhura, you have to add on to this and build on from here.
I love Navya's perspective as well. So thank you, Navya, for sharing that. And Nishtha very nicely brought out the fact that when we were your age, we were not having conversations like this. So thank you for being a part of this conversation. And to add to what Navya says, how do we inspire more women to have aspirations around entrepreneurship? That's the question. And what we realize, and what Navya has been saying also, is that it's a very lonely journey. So it's difficult for someone to actually just stand up one day and say, hey, I want to become an entrepreneur. And therefore, we feel that this requires a little bit of work on our side. And we've been working with young women now for the last 1 year, and we've had some fascinating discoveries and some fantastic insights from the research report. What we feel is that we should look at inspiring young folks with the power of two magic words: community and networks. When we built our community at Aspire for Her, we used a 5-point mindset change model. And we are very confident that by realigning some of those points, we will be able to build a community for aspiring entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs, for aspiring entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs. How are we planning to do that? Well, we have a lot of mentors and role models on our panel already who are successful entrepreneurs who have built their businesses from scratch. We have resources, career resources, business resources, and we're very confident that we will be able to put together a bouquet of services for aspiring entrepreneurs, which could include finance linkages, marketing linkages, credit linkages, as well as relationships with incubators, accelerators. In fact, a lot of them have expressed interest and desire to work with us on this. The third pillar that we'd like to talk about is career previews and opening up doors and windows to new business ideas and folks sharing experiences and mistakes. And this, we feel, will be the perfect recipe for a peer community which will be non-judgmental. People will not feel afraid or awkward to ask silly questions. And I think that is what will take away the loneliness from the entrepreneur's journey, and we will be able to aspire more and more people. We want to launch this formally in the next 3 or 4 months. We have many exciting plans ahead. So watch this space is all I'd say now.
Dr. Nayan?
Yeah, I completely agree with Navya and Madhura. The ambitious target of reaching a $5 trillion economy by 2026 cannot be achieved without the active participation of women in the workforce. As the multinational companies like IBM, Capgemini, Wipro, Vodafone Idea are taking a conscious effort in integrating diversity and inclusion in their human resource policy, the indigenous companies are also following suit gradually to drive a better gender equation in the workplace. But it is taking time. SDG 5 is getting disrupted. Under the circumstances, it may be a better idea for women to create their own jobs. Self employment or entrepreneurship may be an excellent avenue to self sufficiency. I myself have a one person woman owned company named Sustainable Advancements. Very simply speaking, why wait for others when you can create your own? In India, at present, women constitute around 14% of the total entrepreneur base. This can be nurtured and grown many times. It is predicted that women owned enterprises can generate over 50 to 60 million jobs by 2030. Entrepreneurship provides the woman to realize her dreams, create jobs, contribute to GDP, have time flexibility, and most importantly, inspire many others women into being their own boss. In other words, women entrepreneurship has a domino effect. It affects everyone that it touches. India has a thriving startup ecosystem that includes but does not limit to tax benefits, simplified business setup, financial support, tinkering labs, fund of INR 100 billion, over 100 INR, billion INR, facility of ease of doing business. Moreover, there are schemes to boost women entrepreneurship like the Annapurna scheme, Sri Shakti scheme, Mudra Yojana scheme for women, to name a few. In recent times, many organizations have been formed to aid women to transition to this journey through various platforms. Example being Aspire for Her, who are mentoring young women to join the workforce either as an employee or as an entrepreneur, and Sustain, based on collaborative researches like this. In fact, our research pointed out that while businesses in the goods and services sector like travel, boutique owners, fitness trainers have been negatively affected due to cancelled projects, unsatisfactory financing, added burden of housework, and other caregiving roles. But certain businesses like publishing, gardening, landscaping, related micro enterprises have received positive response. In fact, self employment in the knowledge sector or businesses that already had an online presence peaked during this time. So it is important to do your research before you start and then don't look back. Entrepreneurship is one of the key areas that a woman can have, where a woman can have an all round empowerment, social, economic, and others. Decision making, networking, nurturing, and growing a dream brings in confidence to make her voice heard and thereby drive social change for a more equitable, just world. The only limitation is oneself. While the United Nations warns that COVID-19 could wipe out gains in equality for women at work, it is indeed a time to choose to challenge.
Thank you, Dr. Nair. Navya, you should see the chat box. Lot of positive feedback coming in for your comments. Okay, Nishtha, oh, yes. When you remove the video, right? I get worried. I can't see you. So
no, I'm just busy eating strawberries. Sorry.
Okay, very good. Can you? I look forward to hearing from you. Share with us your views.
Purnima, I don't want anybody to see this as an attempt from me to just be provocative for no reason. But let me go back to your question. I think your question started and people have spoken in between, so I may not have the exact set of words together. But your question essentially started with how do we encourage women to believe more in themselves, to be entrepreneurs and to take up. So honestly, I think I have a problem with that, because that's also assuming that the very problem that needs to be solved rests with women themselves. I think, when we talk about gender equality, all of us, including UN Women, including me, including many of us, have this tendency to go back and say, well, let's change who we can change in the ecosystem. right? And the easiest person to change and to rattle and to say, well, you are the one who needs more encouragement, you're the one who needs to aspire more, you're the one who needs to think bigger, uh, is easiest done and easiest executed with the woman, because honestly that's also the weakest link, and we always go back to the weakest link to change who we can. I think the conversation that we are missing to have is to put the onus of breaking these barriers away from women and shift it to really the ecosystem that today remain one of the greatest barriers for women as entrepreneurs. To start with, Madhura spoke about working in banks. We know that all banks are very happy to lend to women, but in groups, despite the knowledge that women are the stickiest consumers, women are the most loyal consumers, women give back the money that they take. uh, Despite all that evidence, we know that there is a certain trust deficit between the woman and the bank to start with. And that's a huge barrier for women who want to even graduate from self-help groups into individual businesses. Because who do they look for when they think of capital? Two, even if we're talking about, let's say, not rural entrepreneurs, but urban entrepreneurs, I have attempted at being an entrepreneur myself, and I have appeared in front of so many VCs. Uh, the Not more than 3%, actually even less than 0.7% of VCs are women. And so how do you explain to a set of suited men, uh, while you spend so much time, let's say I have 30 minutes speaking to a VC, out of which 29 minutes I am spending in breaking the barriers and the prejudices that he already has, right? So if I'm going to spend only 1 minute on my idea, then honestly, the greatness of that idea is not going to go through. And I have been in situations where VCs have asked me, well, what will you do? So how long have you been married? You've been married for 2 years. You want to start a business now at this stage? Think, and the reiteration of, growing a business is going to take every last drop of your blood. Of course it is. I know it. But to assume that that is not a price that I will be ready to pay is a prejudice. So what we really need, I think, is when we talk about encouraging women entrepreneurs, is to build an encouraging ecosystem around her. Because honestly, with nothing changed, no woman is going to feel encouraged because you and I are going to speak to her. Because what does she do with that encouragement? What does she do with that empowerment? And that's what we often, there's this social media meme that goes around, which I really like, which is actually the only meme that I really like, which says we're all busy empowering women, but who is ready for an empowered woman? So we are all very busy encouraging entrepreneurs, but who's ready for a woman entrepreneur? Is the banking system ready? Is the VC system ready? Are the markets ready? Are consumers ready? Are investors ready? And I think, honestly, the moment I even name any of the stakeholders, each one of us, without much explanation, know that we're talking about a barrier there, right? And all these barriers are despite the evidence that we have on the ground. Even, for example, let's take COVID. We have this hoo-ha about how India has become the largest country, is the largest exporter of masks today. Who's behind that story? Women entrepreneurs. Women entrepreneurs have been the most adaptable, most easy to pivot constituency in terms of market. But today, are we talking about that ability? Because that really falls within what an investor would look for. But we're not articulating that into insight, because that is something that has just happened, right? So I think what we really need to do is two things. One is shift our focus from changing the woman, because that's the easiest to do. And honestly, not much has to be done there. And invest in ecosystem strengthening. And two, of course, is to ensure that we build that network of change for her, which is important. And honestly, that network of change starts with families. So many of us work with women on entrepreneurship, but very few of us have the approach of working with the men in the house, of working with the family, of trying to tell them what this would mean for them. And also, it's very difficult to solve a woman's life if you don't take the drudgery away from her. What we're doing today is saying, oh woman, you can be prime minister, you can be entrepreneur, you can be anything as long as you still cook those 3 meals, as long as you still make sure that you're the one putting the kids to sleep. So basically, we are giving women a 20-hour workday, right? And I think our first attempt is to bring down the drudgery, open up time that she has uh, for productive investment, and make sure that the ecosystem is ready to receive the woman that we're talking about.
Wonderful. Nishtha, I hope you're going to get a lot of questions based on what you have said. Rather, I might ask you questions if nobody else does. Very nicely put together. So I'm going to move to one more aspect of the report, and then I'm going to start taking the audience questions. There are some good posts that have come about. The AFH Women Work Report 2021 states that over 50% of the working women in the 16 to 20 years work experience bracket cited the reason for negative impact of COVID-19 as the added burden of housework, childcare, and elder care. What should employers do to handle the situation and retain these women in the workforce? Because this is a problem that's not going to go away very soon. So Madhura, maybe you can begin by giving the perspective, and then you can follow up after Dr. Madhura.
First of all, I think Nishtha, just taking on from the last bit of the conversation, we'd love to work more with you and with UN Women as we are building our proposition for women in entrepreneurship. You have given us a lot to think about, and yes, networks and communities, both these things are important in our mind, but I think the way in which you put it very, very succinctly, it was wonderful. So thank you for that. Coming to Purnima's question, it's a real tragedy that women at those levels, at mid-career levels, have decided that they want to opt out of the workforce, or they have felt compelled to do so. And that's what our report said. It's a tragedy because these women have undergone the usual challenges that women face in the initial years of their life, and they have persevered, they have stuck on, and they have reached this level, this rung in the ladder. So my answer to sort of, to your question, to say what should corporates do differently, is that, we see a lot of D&I policies. We see a lot of work around empathy. We see a lot of work around, women being coached, etc. I think we need to move a little beyond that. And this actually ties in a little bit to what Nishtha was saying as well. We first need to look at this pool, this very shallow talent pool currently of mid-career women who are, who have thrived and existed in the industry in India. Now, this pool needs to be looked at in two different ways. One is long-term and one is short-term. And I'll start with the long-term one first. I think the long-term strategy on this pool should be to just build a much bigger pool, to broaden and deepen the pool. And how do we do that? If we continue doing what we have done in the last 15 years, nothing's going to change. Our women's participation in the labor force has been declining steadily over the past 15 years. It's down to less than 20% today. So it's important for us to build that ecosystem for younger women to see the way forward, to get the necessary inspiration and motivation, and more important, the assurance that they can actually have a good career ahead. And therefore work with organizations like us, work within their own D&I teams to ensure that they look at a fantastic pipeline creation, and they don't just look at the women who have come and joined them. So please inspire the ecosystem, the women, their families, their teachers, and everybody else. And yes, it probably needs to start somewhere in school. Maybe even college is too late. The second, thought that I have for corporates is actually the short-term option. Now, there are many women who we have lost in that space during the pandemic, mid-career women. And there are many women who we have lost earlier. At various stages of the hurdles and obstacles in their personal life, they have decided to choose family over career, and they have moved out. We think that there's an opportunity to get them back into the workforce in a very concerted way. Because we've spoken to a lot of women over the past few weeks, And I'm very fortunate that we have some of them who are working very closely with me on Aspire for Her. They are women who have actually gotten back into the workforce after really long breaks. And we have tried to put together a plan around what they exactly need. Do they need confidence? Do they need some resilience to ensure that the junior in college who is now their boss doesn't really make them feel bad because the paths are different and the destinations are different? Do they need a different sort of mindset? This is what we want to work on. And on 15th of March, we're very happy to launch our new network on return to work. We're all ready with it. We have a lot of our mentors who are very excited and wanting to contribute to it. So we look forward to any partners who would like to support us, because this is not a journey that we can do alone. We need all stakeholders in the ecosystem to come and help us with this. So thank you for the question, Purnima, and I hope I managed to answer it.
So before Dr. Nayan speaks, we have a lot of feedback coming saying that why did we keep men out of this discussion? I think going forward, Madhura, is very important. Like someone said, don't exclude 50% of the world. So this is in a way the reverse. So let's get a man or men along for future discussions. We need those perspectives too.
Yeah, we do have a lot of them on the panel, though I see a lot of them actively participating on the chat box. But yes, we should need them on the panel as well, on speaking as well. Yes.
Dr. Nair?
Yeah, yes. In fact, I think that's an excellent idea. And I was discussing with Madhura that one of the researches we should do should be with the men, because unless we do not know their perspective, we will not be able to bring in any transformation. So that's another story, that's another day. But Purnima, excellent question. It is evident older women tend to have more household responsibilities with older parents and young children. In fact, our research pointed out that over 81% of women in middle management, usually within 16 to 20 years of work experience, were either negatively impacted or both negatively and positively impacted. Their average age was around 37 years, and the highest percentage that shouldered added household and caregiving responsibilities. There were about, they had about 52% of them had children, out of whom over 11% were under the age of 10 years. Further, over 16% of them did not have any household help. Their condition was worsened during the pandemic with the concept of being always on with less defined working hours in their job. Majority of them also had to take pay cuts and did not receive any increments or bonuses due to businesses trying to cut costs across their segments. Working mothers absorb a disproportionately amount of childcare and homeschooling responsibilities, and that has really taken a toll on their job market as well, in their professional field as well. Mothers of children under the age of 10 who are dual career couples are twice as likely as men in the same situation to spend more than 5 additional hours a day on household responsibilities than they did prior to COVID-19. To bring in transformation, and that's your question, Purnima, first and foremost, employers need to acknowledge this situation as a real issue. Working women in India, and interestingly all over the world, do have a dual role at work and at home, especially so when there is a global emergency like the pandemic that robs them of their support system. As soon as employers recognize this, their policies will be tweaked accordingly. Women in such circumstances need structured flexibility. HR should come out with new working hours for women, maybe may not be from 10 to 6, but 2 to 10. Once the policies are structured, it becomes easier for both parties to abide and match expectations. If we lose out on our women, we lose out on a critical talent base with unique capabilities. We cannot talk of diversity and inclusion on one side and not create policies around them. We need to retain our existing workforce first and at the same time attract newer women in the workforce. The TMT or the top management team must take a lead role in this. But it would be incomplete if we only spoke of the employers. The family as an institution should also facilitate the women's work. We need to identify our unique competencies and maximize on them. Only when all the social forces or institutions come together can there be an equitable, just society. It all starts with acknowledging the same and the willpower to transform. Purnima.
Nishtha, if you could share your perspective. I know you've spoken a little bit about this earlier, but if you could expand on it, it would be great.
Purnima, sorry, I missed. I think the internet is a little patchy. What are you asking me to expand on?
I said, what are your views on the subject? I know you've spoken about it already a little bit, but if you could expand on it, it would be great. What can the ecosystem do, and how can the ecosystem come together to support women in this particular experience bracket? How do they juggle jobs? How do employers help them to juggle these various elements of their life?
Purnima, there are many answers to this and there are many ways of looking at it. And honestly, we are not yet at a point where we have enough evidence to say, A is working or B is working or B is working more than A. I think, companies, particularly the organized sector of the private sector is doing a lot. Almost every corporate has a diversity and inclusion function. Almost, we all have a second coming program of bringing back mothers. My principal observation is most of these initiatives are not in response to what women want. It is because we have an alien scent or a very very borrowed sense of what we think an empowered woman would want. We think we want flexibility. She would want flexibility. We think she wants a 3-day working week. It's basically, to be honest, a very very borrowed perspective. I worked in the private sector. I was a civil servant. I now have been working with the UN for 8 years. Somehow, gender has been the issue of gender equality has been a companion all throughout. For the last 8 years, it's been work and passion. But I have honestly not heard a lot of people speak to a woman and say, what do you want? What is it that is going to help your life and really make you, as an ecosystem, bring you that respite that you need. But there are certain things that I know for sure as principles. These are not initiatives, but as principles that I think have been very, very long ignored. One, we kind of miss the opportunity of talking to women when they convert from a career seeker to a job seeker. Right. And I think women make that transition. And many women make that transition where they continue to be a part of your labor force, but there is the attachment with that labor force becomes loose as time goes. And when a woman drops out in the midline, or like we say, there's so much leak at the mid level. It's not because she's thinking of leaving that day. It is not a decision that she has made at that point in time. It is how she has now conceived and thought about her career for a period of time, right? So it's important that we make that conversation with women when they make that shift from being a career seeker to a mere job seeker. Once they've made that transition, we're almost sure that there are life events in her life that will pull her towards falling off, because the rest of the ecosystem is not enabling enough. So the second principle is, I think, we have somehow, which is also a very Western idea of how women live their lives. We think that and most Indian corporates are also responding to only the challenge of motherhood. Without so a lot of the diversity inclusion programs, or the lot of coming back into the workforce, the second chance of bringing back women, is when where women actually have the burden of the joy and the burden of motherhood, and therefore fall off the workforce. What we have not socio-culturally really located is that in the Indian scenario, there are several events, and those events happen across the life cycle of her life, where marriage is again a critical point where she makes that choice. Motherhood is a critical point where she makes that choice. And elderly care, again, is a critical point where she makes that choice. So it's very important to look at women's life from a life cycle approach. 3, I think it's important for us to invest and see, well, we're doing a lot of things. Does this respond to women, and also to do an impact assessment as soon as we can to say, well, yeah, I'm doing that, we're doing this, but is it working? And one of the things that I have heard from a lot from corporates is, we have a flexibility program, there is no uptake. We have a crash in the office, there is no uptake. We have a bringing back buddy mentor program, and that there is no uptake. So what is it that really women want? Because we seem to be doing all the right things. And most often when I ask CEOs whether they asked any woman if this is what she wanted, the answer is, well, that's what everybody else is doing. So I think there is a conversation, top down, bottom up, horizontal, that needs to be had, and we need to be able to reconceive some of these initiatives. One very big example is women forever have been asking from work from home, but it was seen as a productivity barrier. It was seen as a difficult arrangement in terms of supervision. It was seen as a difficult arrangement for effective team management. And lo and behold, here we are. We've all worked from home for a year, and we've not sucked at it, neither of us. And so honestly, why was it so difficult to convince anybody that this was something that women wanted, and it was not at the cost of organizational health? Because today men are getting to do it, and so it's all fine. So honestly, I just feel that we're at a point in time when we look at the ecosystem, we need some principal conversations. We need to listen to women and what they want. We need to respond to what they want. And also the reason that several ecosystem efforts do not have uptake organizationally or even within the conversation of an entrepreneur is because there is always an unpaid cost to accessing it. Right? So it's not that women don't want to take up maternity leave. It's not that women don't want to take up flexibility. What women don't want to do is the unset cost that is buried somewhere that she knows she's going to have to pay. So this entire thinking of charitability in ensuring that women are a part has to be dealt with in a way that the world is equal. But the one thing as an ecosystem approach that I have again said, and it's a very boring thing to say again and again, is we have to ensure that women's lives at home is better. Because if we don't change that one little constituency where she spends 10 hours of her day, and a constituency that holds back the rest 10 hours of her day, it's going to be very difficult to solve anything else. So first is, even as organizations, even as the private sector, we have to allow for policies that also allow men to be full stakeholders at home. And when that happens over a period of time, we can then ask women to take that time off and do other things and be enterprising enough and encourage them and do all those wonderful things that we're talking about. From an ecosystem approach, I think we've, as far as we speak to bankers every day, we speak to procurers every day, I think we've gone so far to ensure that women are what we will in banking language call a target, priority lending sector. Right. So I think we've been able to put women on the center stage a bit. This is a conversation that all of us need to have in the same voice, at the same decibel, again and again, till we see that change. But what we also need to know, is while we have this conversation, we have to work on all aspects of it, because we cannot work in silos, because women's lives don't work in silos. And I think it sounds very obvious, it sounds very basic, but having worked on this, you'll be very surprised how many of us actually don't have it as conceptually clear in implementation as we may have it in our heads. I think that's a very complicated answer to a simple question. But
thank you, Nishtha. You have stopped me asking you any more questions because you've answered all of them.
That's okay. The art of over speaking.
Okay, so I have a couple of audience questions, keeping the time in mind. And Navya has been very bold and brave enough to want to take on a question which a lot of us think a great deal about. So there'll be a lot of questions. So Navya says she is open to talking about the glass ceiling. I'm not sure whether it's, so my question to you, Navya, is, do young girls of today still see a glass ceiling? A lot of us who have worked for many years have gone through it and pretended it doesn't exist or ignore it and continue. But does your generation still see something as a glass ceiling?
I would say that we, as women and also as young women, have seen a lot of opinions and comments about, you're too young to be starting your own business. What do you know about running a business? You've just finished your education. You don't have the experience to finance your business. Or I think it's more of the ageist remarks that come with being extremely young and having straight out of college started something. I think that's something that I have personally seen over the last year since founding my startup. And I think that a lot of other women as well face a similar problem. I also have three co-founders who are young women as well, and I think all four of us have felt at some point that our age is often used against us as a means of saying that you are too young to be doing what you're doing, and you should not you should take time, you should learn, instead of jumping straight into the entrepreneurial journey. But I think that it is extremely important for younger people like us to come out here and start businesses, because I think the solutions that we are providing are very fit for the next generation of people that are coming up. And I think that us being involved in the economy, whether it's in the form of providing solutions and products, to whether it's being a part of leadership roles, I think that the younger generation needs to be involved in all these decision making processes, because we are the future and we are going to be the ones who are going to inherit this world and this society that we're living in. And I think to everybody who usually says that you're too young to be doing what you're doing, I think that my response to them has always been that I want to be a part of the future that I'm building, because I'm building that future for myself and for other women and other men my age who have been a part of this society for far too long and been discouraged from a lot of things. And you don't want to see history repeating itself. So to a lot of people who do have comments about age and gender, especially in the entrepreneurial context, I think that has always been my response, that it's extremely important for this generation to be part of everything that is going to build our future.
What a mature response. I wish some of us had brains like this at 23. And I don't think, Madhura, you should really worry about future India if you're going to have girls like this speaking with this kind of wisdom. Okay, so I have two questions. One is for Dr. Nair, and the last one will be for Madhura before we end. So, Dr. Nair, yeah, sorry. There's a question here for you. It says, when you did your study, which part of the data really surprised you? Some part of it you might have assumed was in a particular way, but what really stood out and surprised you and, made you question it?
Yeah, very interesting, a very interesting finding, which I faced when I was doing that research. This research, the entry level or the junior role category had the highest proportion of women that were negatively affected at 33.6%. Around 50.7% of the junior role women have stated long hours and the burden of work as the reason for the negative effect. The psychological effect of long working hours, a breakdown of the office home divide, the discomfort of acclimatizing to a new workplace virtually could be some of the potential causes. But what really struck me was when compared on a relative basis to women higher up on the management hierarchy, women in entry level and junior roles were more impacted by the financial or the employment aspects of the pandemic, and less impacted by gender-based disparities such as disproportionate share of household work. So this is something which I thought was one of the key areas which struck me.
Okay. Madhura, before we end,
because not all the women were affected similarly. That's what. So while the elder ones had household work, they were more financially impacted.
Okay, thank you. I'm watching the clock, so I'm going to end with the last question to Madhura. You'll have the last word on this. Madhura, everyone says, well, things have been good, and I think Nishtha made a point that, why was flexibility such a big issue and seen as a bonus when all of us have proven it time and again, and the last 1 year have reinforced it. But there are others who say a lot of women are getting out of the workforce. And how do you see it? There's a question out here. How do you see it affecting those who are yet to enter the workforce? Do you think this pandemic period and this one and a half or 2 years, how is it going to impact young people who are going to enter the workforce maybe in 21, 22, 23? Is there any insight that you could share with us? And after that, we could end on that note.
Thank you, Purnima. Some time back, I heard a comment by Melinda Gates, who is also a very passionate advocate of gender equality. And she tried to put a number to the number of years that women would take to achieve complete equality, everything else being equal to men in the workforce. And that number was 208 years. So I think, the pandemic, I think, has just exacerbated that number. And therefore, yes, there will be women who will get further discouraged by seeing the low penetration of women in the workforce, by seeing people moving out. But that's where people like us come in. And that's where these conversations help. That's where people like Nishtha, people like Nayan, people like Navya, and you need to get together and keep this conversation going so that we buck the trend. The trend was bad earlier. It's just become worse. The challenge for us is just a little bit bigger, but we will get there. And we are very confident that with all the stuff that we're doing and with all the other wonderful work that other organizations are also doing in this space, we will get to that magic number that we are all looking at. So thank you, Purnima.
I think we have come to the end of our session. It's close to an hour. I'm going to wrap up. Thank you to a wonderful panel, Navya, Nan, Nishtha, Madhura. Wonderful questions coming in, especially from Kakoli. Great comments from Sundari and others. Thank you for being such a wonderful audience and such a wonderful panel. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.